So I have two of these little trucks. Both of them came from Radio Shack. And the problem I'm having is I have two boys that got to play with them. And they don't have lock differentials. So what you have is it'll just spin whatever tires in the air and then the thing doesn't move. So I came up with a solution and it worked so good I thought maybe I would try and do a little video here that shows what I'm doing. And first off, you're going to have to pull the axles apart and split them open. So I'm going to pause the video for now, get one of these opened up, and continue from there. Okay, I've got my axle removed. I opted to go ahead and just pull the motor loose from the axle because these wires on these cheaper ones, I'm sure they're probably pretty much all the same. Instead of having a connector to where you can actually unplug these wires, they're soldered straight to the board inside. So it's a lot easier rather that you can pull this cover off with just 3 screws and get to the board, but all those wires are just soldered on there. So I discovered that already. But it's pretty easy if you just go through. There's this one has a cover over the heat shield that had 2 screws on it. Pull that off, and then there was a cap over the back. This right here, over the back of the motor here. 2 screws on that, and pop that off. And then you've got 2 screws coming through from this side. They're right here that hold the motor into the axle. So once you slide that out, you've got your axle completely separated. And I'm going to work on getting that split, and I'm going to pause the video for now. Alright, one thing I thought I'd show you before I went ahead and pulled this apart. On mine here you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 screws, I think it was, that held it on. I've already had one of these apart. This is the second one I've done, as I mentioned earlier. So one thing I noticed is this is where I've got my high and low, and I'm going to be lifting this side where the screws were at. Will slide off of the other side here, and it's helpful to push your gears, this switch, whether it's to the high or low side, whichever side is towards the side that you're not pulling off, push it towards that. Otherwise this switch tries to come off as you split it, come with this top, and take some of the gears with it, and it just makes a little bit more of a mess, makes it a little harder to figure out where everything goes once you get inside, and you've got to put it back together. So just it's a little stiff, but you want to get this slid over to this side. In my situation, that's over to high, so that when I pull this side off, this and the gear that it's attached to will stay in this housing and not come off with this cover. So when you open it up, this is what you got here. It looked a little overwhelming the first time I opened it up, but it's really not that bad. It definitely is a lot easier if you do get that switch pushed down here. Otherwise, what it wants to do is, you can see the switch is attached to that gear, and if the switch wants to go with this piece as you pull it off, it's going to pull that gear with it, and that gear tries to pull a couple of the gears with it as well. So if you can get it all like this, that's great, and then you can start taking it apart, and just pay attention as you take it apart. It'll make sense, hopefully, to most people. As you pull it apart, what's going on there. But you need to get down underneath those gears. You can see there's some screws down in there. You got to get down to those screws, and that's where the the problem is it allows those wheels to free spin. So first we're going to get these gears out of the way. Alright, so I've pulled, this is one of the gears that drives from the pinion gear for the motor, drives this, which in turn drives this little guy. This is your high-low gear, and then the switch that was attached to that gear. And that pretty much gets everything out of our way that we need to. You can see all three screws. Sorry. Obviously, I have kids. So, anyhow, you've got 3 screws there, and those are the ones we need to pull out. Alright, so here's the piece that had the 3 screws in it. We pulled it out, and inside you have this kind of white canister here. That's where the issue is with the freewheeling. So what we want to do is essentially make it so you've got like a locker. So this is what we need to get to, and everything just pushes into the end. There was the axle inside here. This has a nut on the end of it, and that nut goes into this hex shape in the end. And on the other end, it's got a nut and also kind of a spline piece, I guess you'd call it. I don't know what else to call it. But it just slides off. And you've got 2 screws here that we need to pull out, and then we can open this up. Alright, so I've got this I already pulled off. I had the 2 screws holding this on. You pull that off. Right on top is this little gear here. And you pull that out, and you've got this, which mine's pretty gooey because I already put one type of glue in there that wasn't the right kind. Did not work well. And so this one's, normally you just have a little bit of white grease in there. At least mine was white grease. Oh, some kind of little grease in there. You can take it out, clean it. Would probably work best, but with the type of glue I'm using, it's not going to matter really if you clean it or not. I'm using hot glue, and basically all you need is something in there to get hard to keep these things from turning. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this with hot glue and get it put back together. Alright, so I filled this with hot glue, and that's really what you want to do. You want to leave all the gears in there, just how they were, and then fill the void around all those gears with hot glue, and then get it all screwed back together before any of it sets up. So I wish I could have shown you more of what I was doing, but it's pretty easy. Just literally just leave all the gears in there, fill the whole void around them with hot glue, get this cap screwed back on before it sets up so that everything's locked in place. And that's all you're trying to do, is you're trying to get this piece right here completely locked up so that when you put power to one side of it, this whole thing's going to turn. This is where where it allowed your tires to slip and only spin the easy tire, whichever tire was spinning easiest. This is where the problem's at. So now that we've locked this up tight, it's going to spin this whole canister all the time, meaning you've essentially now just installed a locker. So now I just need to get it all put back together, and so that's where hopefully you remember how all this goes back. So we have this kind of spline piece here that obviously goes on this end, and you've got to kind of play with it a little bit to get both the nut and this white plastic piece here to line up. You got to get this nut to line up with the hole inside, and this piece here to line up with the 2 parts of this white spider gear canister. So I'm going to need both hands for that, and so I got to shut the camera off for a second. Okay, I've got this shaft and that black plate that had the 3 screws in it. I've got all that shoved back together. You're going to want to make sure, as you put it together, that plate that you took the 3 screws out of, or something similar with your application, is seated all the way down. If it's not, that means you don't have one of three things lined up. You're going to have the axle coming out this end, had a hex head on it, nut, that had to seat into that white canister. And then on the other end of the white canister, this main axle shaft, as you remember, had a hex head as well. And also the let's see, yeah, it was on this end. There was the spline piece that you had to have seated in there. So those three things, if they're seated properly, that plate will slide all the way down and seat into this main housing here. So if it's not, that's your problem. You've got one of those three things is not seated properly. So if you've got it that far, I'm going to start putting gears in, and we'll pick it up after I get some gears in. Alright, I've got all the gears back in. Just kind of make sure, take a look, make sure it looks like everything's going to work properly, that you've got it all in right. It's only one way that's going to go in and work, so just make sure you've got it in right. And then all we've got to do is you've got to take this housing and slide it back over top of this. Now, there's a couple things. This piece right here is going to have to seat right there in that housing. So you might take a little bit of pressure to get that to seat. Also, this high-low slide switch here is going to have to get lined up in the slide on this housing over here. Everything else, when I've done this, all these other shafts and everything seem to line up just fine. Haven't had any issues with things going back together. It's just those two items. And then, of course, you got to get this axle slid through. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that, and we'll pick it up after that. Okay, you'll notice that I've gone in reverse now. I've pulled the gears back out, and when I went to put this put the housing on, it wasn't seating properly. It was held off by about 1/16 of an inch, maybe a little more. And the problem being is this gear right here needs to seat right onto this, and I didn't have it seated properly. So it's got to line up and just pushes on here. And there we go. So that's if you got a problem, if you get it start getting it put back together and your housing doesn't want to seat, that's what you're going to want to check. You've got something in here that's not maybe quite back together right. So I've got to actually pull this back apart to get these gears in here, but I just wanted to show you how that needed to be lined up and pressed back together. So I'm going to go ahead and get these gears back in, and also get this housing put back on, and I'll continue from there. Alright, I've got this axle all back together, all the screws back in it. So the first thing we're going to need to do is install the motor into here. There's going to be these two screws to put back in over here. And then mine has this cover that goes on, and next is this cover, the heat shield cover that goes over this. Yeah, I don't remember what these are called, but it just this piece here helps suck the heat out of the motor, keep it cool, and then this is just a guard that goes over it to keep you from burning your fingers on this piece here. So I'm going to go ahead and get all that installed, and at that point we'll almost have this axle back together. Alright, it's time to reattach this whole axle. I've got the motor all installed, cover on, And it's just now trying to install it back on the vehicle. And mine, these are all going to differ, I'm sure, quite a bit. But mine just takes this steel rod. You've already had to pull this apart to get to this point, but I wish this was designed a little different because I'd really like to get rid of these fake fuel tanks. But that's what holds all the suspension and also the battery cover on. So we're ready to go ahead and put that back together, and also I got to reattach my shocks here. And then the rear will be all done, and we'll move on to the front. Alright, onto the front axle. I've actually got to take the bumper off on mine, these 4 screws, and this whole bumper comes off. And that's part of what fastens this axle on. And then, flip this over here real quick. Shocks on mine. All I gotta do is pull these down, and they just pop out. So yours may be like mine, they may be different. Also, this has my steering servo. There is, let's see, 3 screws hold this in. And I'm going to go ahead and pop this off because, again, this is hardwired straight to the board inside. And so the easiest thing to do to remove this axle then is to just pop this servo out, and then I can pull the axle free and leave the servo here. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done. Alright, I've got the axle all torn off. This is where this servo goes down, connects to the steering, and then our drive shaft came in here. And as we pulled that servo, it takes the whole cover with it and exposes these gears. So we need to go ahead and take note where these go, because we're going to be flipping this whole thing over. So you need to take note where these go and pull them out. And then just set them aside. And flip it over. And we've got 2 screws at each end. Screw here and a screw here. Pull all that off, and this whole half of the axle lifts off and exposes everything inside. Alright, we've pulled the top off the axle here, or bottom rather, and you'll see we have the same kind of canister here. All this stuff just lays out flat in here, and all you gotta do is grab one of these knuckles and pull it loose from the steering. It just lifts right out of here. Slides off. Slide it right off the end of the steering. Set it aside. It's much easier when you have 2 hands, but now you have this whole thing. We'll just lift right out of here. And you can just slide the axles out of this canister. You remember they just slides on there. There we go. So now you've got the same exact canister again. So, as you already know, we're going to pop these 2 screws, pull this top gear out, and fill the whole void with hot glue and put it all back together again. Alright, I've got the canister all put back together. Make sure, especially on this front one, at least in my situation, you got to really make sure that you don't have any excess glue on the outside of this, because it's a much tighter area in here for this to spin in. So if you've got any excess glue on here, it's going to cause drag inside this housing, and if it's bad enough, it won't be able to turn your axle, but at the very least, any amount of drag on this is going to slow the vehicle down, use more battery, nothing good. So just make sure it's good, clean, and also you can see a little bit of white grease here. Most of the grease on this is a well-used unit. Most of the grease on this is no more. So I'm going to go ahead and re-grease, just put a little bit of grease. Mainly where you want to put it is not necessarily actually in here, but on these shafts all this these black kind of bushing areas. This shaft here spins inside of these bushings, and so you want to get some grease between that shaft and the bushings. So just kind of coat that shaft up good, and that'll help your vehicle move a lot easier and therefore go faster and use less battery. So I'm going to go ahead and get those greased up, and then you just got to take and put each one of these pieces back how they were, and get your axle assembled from knuckle all the way across to the other knuckle. And I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, we've got it all back together here. You may find it's a little challenging to get every one of these pieces lined up back in the slot that it goes in. I found you definitely want to get this, you want to go ahead and hook the knuckles to the steering, and then get this whole unit slid together, and then work on getting all these lined up and actually get it to drop into place. If you try and do it piece by piece, you're going to get to the other end, and it's kind of difficult to try and get the knuckle to line up with the shaft, because you've got to then lift the shaft up to get the knuckle lined up, and you end up getting things coming back apart back in here. So if you can get everything kind of put in a line and then just drop it into place, I found that to be the easiest way. Alright, got the cover all screwed back on, so I'm going to flip it back over, and hopefully you remember how your gears go back in. Mine were pretty simple. So we're ready to go ahead and slide the axle back under, and get the servo screwed back in. Alright, so I've got the servo back in, and on mine you'll see I have right here this drive shaft that passes all the way through here, and you can see it. You can just see it poking out there. Goes into the rear axle. So the rear axle actually is one with a motor in it, and then it has a drive shaft that drives all the way from the rear axle all the way through the truck, and comes out to the front axle here. So you'll want to make sure that you've got the axle, the drive shaft is seated in the rear axle, and then you also get it seated in the front axle as you install the front axle. Alright, so I've got the whole front end back together, reinstalled the shocks, and moving on to the last thing to get traction is the tires. Now, on mine, this gray piece out here is actually separate from the wheel. So what I've done is I've pulled the tire off, so it's on the outside of the wheel. I left the inside, here we go, left the inside bead seated. But on the outside, I've pulled it out, which then allows me, I can take this, screw it, and pinch the bead of the tire between the actual wheel and this cover, which then acts like a bead lock. So then my wheel can't spin inside the tire. Of course, the other thing you can always do is just to glue these beads onto the wheel and seat them like normal and glue them. I opted for this because it was pretty easy. So you can give that a try as well. Those two things combined give a crazy amount of added traction.
Okay, it's recording.
Alright, we're going to show you, I've got my two boys out here, we're going to show you how much better this works. You'll notice that if it gets a tire in the air, it keeps going anyway. Well, as you can see, it does pretty good. If you want to get some tires off the ground, now I've got all 4 tires spinning all the time, so it helps it out a lot. Trucks are a little slow, as I said. They're pretty well used, and we're getting ready to order some new batteries for them, but they do a lot better. So hopefully this helps you out, and thanks for watching.